is there is you may have picked up on this in the report. At certain times of year, particularly in the summer, there is a distinct difference in temperature trends in the western part of the state compared to the east.
Right.
And
Yes.
most of the population lives in the east. A lot of our major commodities, corn, soy, are predominantly east of you all, and
Right.
have somewhat different signals in the summer. And I do think that it's important to understand that Nebraska, in some ways, is almost like the dividing line between a central U.S. that is seeing temperatures in midsummer that are relatively flat, at least for maximum temperatures, and the western U.S., which is seeing pretty rapid increases in temperature. Yeah, and I guess my sense is a lot of people do perceive that things are different than they were, especially if they're older. They sense that there isn't as much snow cover in the winter. We do have more warm days. We have probably more swings from really wet to really dry. So I think that people do perceive some of those things, but you're right. We have had some very wet years. I think 3 winters ago was near record snowfall or at record snowfall for a good portion of the Panhandle, West Central Nebraska. And especially in your areas, large swings are just a normal part of the climate, and always will be, always have been. Where I think the climate change comes in is that it could be coming from a high that was, if not like a literal all-time high, certainly it's getting toward the top of an historical range that you would expect for a certain time of year. And then you could really drop off to something that's, very, very cold. And I think those, even if that what it drops to isn't record cold, those rapid changes, I think, can have impacts physiologically, but I think really from a cattle standpoint, what concerns me about these polar vortex stretching events is that we can still get temperatures that are, if not at all-time record lows, they still are very, very cold. And whereas I think in the past where you would have maybe more routinely had more sustained cold, if not like maybe you didn't literally have snow on the ground all winter, but if you were able to maintain temperatures that were generally under 50 degrees and often under 30, I think it's easier for cattle or all livestock and probably humans to acclimate versus like if you're really mild, all of a sudden it's like, boom, here's this big cold snap.
Right.
I think it is more problematic for them. And that I do think that that's something that, probably I would want to raise awareness of, particularly for livestock producers, that even though the average day is going to be milder, that cold isn't necessarily ever going to go away entirely.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say that what we consider extreme weather is just more naturally amplified in that area than it is in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. I mean, it is an extreme place just by nature. Just climate change is making it even probably more so. The downsides of having a warm winter, warm early spring is unless you are getting a lot of moisture, which in that part of the country is unusual if you were warm and wet in the winter. That is not a very common thing. That just means you're just almost having like a perpetual shortage of moisture, meaning that it's hard on the pastures. It means that you're going to be more reliant on irrigation. It also could mean that certain insects or plant species that maybe normally would not have survived that area may be able to make it because it is warmer.
I mean, we still can avoid the worst impacts. And, I guess what I tell people, and again, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic by nature, but, I tell people it's going to be different. But it doesn't have to be terrible. And the more prepared that we are just as a society to extreme weather. So, I mean, if we are planning our communities around, being resilient to flooding, drought, extreme heat, big blizzards, things that allow us to actually still function at a high level, which basically means we're going to keep our economies going. Because and fundamentally, that is why it is so difficult to kick the carbon habits, because, I mean, our economy is still, for better or for worse, is still very much tied to that. I think the more that we could do to reduce those emissions and really try to sequester more carbon, really figure out ways to remove it from the atmosphere, the better off that we'll be.
Right.
But, regardless, even if every person on this planet just magically disappeared overnight, this planet was still going to warm for a while. The extreme weather that comes from that is going to continue. But how we respond to this and manage this is going to determine how successful we are. And I think that we have advantages in Nebraska over other parts of the country and the world. We don't have to deal with sea level rise here.
Right.
We don't have to spend billions and trillions trying to reinforce a shoreline. The impacts are just different, and they may not be as just glaringly obvious on a day to day. But I mean, if you think about things like in a longer term approach, like at certain times of year, especially, I think like midwinter, we don't have as much snow cover, and I think how we would dress for school and work is often different because we aren't having to bundle up like we probably used to.
Right.
What's most important to me is that people are willing to, particularly when it comes to agriculture and our infrastructure, like if they are willing to think about doing things differently or are doing things differently, then I think I think we're going to be, we'll manage this somehow.
Yeah.
And again, our forebears experienced a lot of extremes and managed to get through it. And I mean, it's just those extremes are just going to look a little different.
Right.